All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Asians Represent. I am Liana Mackenzie, once again in the host chair, and with me is the incredibly wonderful and talented Pam, who has done so much with us and has just always been a excellent person who I love creating with and collaborating with. But Pam, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi guys. Hi guys, women, queers, however you want to identify. I'm Pam Punsalan. My pronouns are she, they. I have done a lot of work in tabletop and in various forms. Most of it has been design, writing, and community, but I also do editing and sensitivity consultation, cultural consultation, and a little bit of project management. So I am Nebula nominated because we lost to Elden Ring, for shame, with Journeys to the Radiant Citadel and D&D. I've also done some work with World of Darkness, specifically Hunter, and Pathfinder, Starfinder, a bunch of PTBA stuff, lots of FITD, a little bit of OSR. And right now I am working on the official Blades in the Dark supplement for the Dagger Isles. So that's me.
Awesome. Uh, and as you know, I'm Liana Mackenzie, one of the hosts of Asians Represent. I also head Valorous Games, and I work on the Valor system, which is very anime inspired, which, as folks will probably start to notice the pattern here, tends to involve a lot of the content that I create for Asians Represent. Speaking of, today we are going to have a incredible and not at all controversial discussion about gacha games, specifically how the mechanics of a gacha game makes games and game design worse. This is something that we both have a lot of experience with. How many days clear are you from Honkai Star Rail? Do we
Oh,
have a token going?
Oh my gosh. So I think I have fully recovered from my gotcha phase since around September this year. So dubious congratulations to me because I will be rather earnest and unapologetic in saying that I was a dolphin, nearly a whale for nearly every gotcha game that I have touched, which is not great if you think about those statistics, given that, that's real money going out the door, right? And while I've personally viewed some of that as okay, this is me supporting the developers, it is still a lot of money out that door that could have been going to a lot of things, right? So um, I know that a lot of people say that, it's not about games, it's about the waifus and the husbandos, but like that's not really what we're here to talk about. And if you're one of those crowds and you get a little defensive, this is probably not the recording for you. So
I mean, right there in the title is how gacha makes game design worse. So we will be looking at this with a critical eye as to game designers, but if you are prepared, you're emotionally ready for this discussion. For those of you who may not have broken the grasp, let us begin. The concept of a gacha game, or short for gachapon, which is a hand crank capsule toy dispenser that is popular in Japan, has become ubiquitous in the gaming sphere. Simulating the random draw aspects of the toys that bear their namesake, gacha games have become a major force in both mobile and PC markets. While commonly associated with free-to-play model that entices players to spend more money to draw the exceptionally rare character, as Pam referenced, the titular whales doing this spending. Um, these mechanics have even begun to creep into what are so-called premium or even AAA gaming experiences, including mechanics such as loot boxes, which will hold rewards like skins and cosmetic options, or even the unlock of certain characters in games that you've already paid full $60-$70 purchase price for. Um, Unequivocally, we will say that while the monetization of these kinds of games is nothing short of predatory, the amount of money required to pull a single rare character can easily dip into the hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, which, put in perspective, to pull a single character, if I'm spending $1,000 when I could get a full game experience ostensibly for $60 to $70, that is out of bounds. That is just not acceptable. Um, but that aside, these mechanics also have a critical impact on the active design of games. There's been quite a bit of research already done on the predatory nature of the games, and a number of other creators have highlighted this, such as Stephanie Sterling with the Jimquisition. There's been some scholarly research as well. We'll include links to some of that content, as well as the scholarly research in the show notes, since that is not actually what we're here to talk about. As we've kind of mentioned, today we want to break down the mechanics behind the gotcha model, ways that they impact overall game design when compared to more traditional single player games, and analyze the concepts and mechanics from the perspective of game designers, just to give everyone a more clear idea of the ways that these mechanics will subtract from your overall experience, and hopefully provide you with the tools to recognize these negative design mechanics and avoid them in the future. So yes, as I said, it's not going to be a positive. Y'all gotcha defenders, you have been warned. But I do invite you to stick around anyway, because this will hopefully be educational to everybody.
As educational as we can make it anyway. But yeah, because like the thing, so some of the gacha games that I have played are mostly from mihoyo, because mihoyo is like way out there right now with their stuff. I mean, a lot of people either know of Genshin Impact because someone in their circles, which does dangerously, I might add, include the younger members of their family, plays Genshin Impact, and then now they have their new baby, Honkai Star Rail, which, for better or for worse, is flying very, very high right now. And the interesting thing with a lot of these designs is you can really feel it when they are trying to connect a new shiny character of choice to the current storyline, or when they are building up for their new favorite of the month, because I think everyone more or less knows how gachas go. Every month or so, roughly, they will have banner characters, and those banner characters are not just designed to be extremely shiny to look at and aesthetically pleasing for their particular sides of the market, but they will literally have mechanics that will make your gameplay easier for that specific segment of the storyline. So there is already an invisible barrier in place for the casual player, whom they are hoping to frustrate enough by making it very, very hard in order for you to proceed and see the rest of the quote unquote story. I use air quotes with story because, in my experience, with all of the gachas I've played, and this goes way beyond Stariel, I have buried their names from my head because of legitimate trauma. Because let me get a little personal here. Gachas are really, really good at making you feel very good when you feel like shit. And if you have even just a little bit of money and you're that kind of person like me, you will spend that money in order to feel good consistently for your gacha game. Right. So, big problem. Anyway, so the way that the game lures you is it will up their difficulty to the wazoo, and the one magic bullet you have is that character that you could have a chance at pulling on that banner. And I have heard arguments of, well, you can optimize, well, you can do this, well, you can grind a lot. That is still literally man hours of your day that you are blowing your phone up with to do your optimization. Sure, there's autoplay, cool and good. Why are you still spending that time doing that when you could be doing something else? I am not here to tell you I'm right and that you're wrong. If you want to keep going with these games, that's fine. But let's still study the sheer material conditions that these games are creating. The amount of time you spend, the amount of research you put in to optimize, the long haul that you have to play if you are a free to play player to grind all of those tickets to possibly get that. And if you're not a free to play player, the sheer amount of money that you are spending in order to get each of those characters. Because within 2 to 3 months, if the game is designed well, and I say that again, air quotes, well, versus the more predatory gacha types, that means that your character has a viability of about 2 to 6 months before a new character comes in and the power creep sets in and you're screwed. because you're going to have to fix your gear, or you're going to have to fix your team comp, or you're going to have to fix la da 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 in order to get their singular patch of a story in which you'll be waiting with bated breath for the next patch of the story. I could go on forever, but we could probably stop here and like tackle any of the points that I've raised so far.
Honestly, that was a really good summary of kind of the things that we're going to be delving into today. One of the things that you talked about that I wanted to start with was narrative, actually. We talk a lot and often somewhat disdainfully about the story, but one of the things that Gacha really do, especially from the MiHoYo games, do tend to excel in is that, having this host of like colorful and interesting characters that they make you care about, because that's how they get you to spend money, obviously. But it also creates a number of narrative challenges, not insurmountable. And MiHoYo has definitely gotten quite skilled at getting past these in some respects, but narrative issues nonetheless. And the first and one thing I wanted to start on is kind of the muddled story aspect. As Pam was mentioning, a lot of times they're going to always be setting up this, like, here's this new character that you really, really need to draw on. And it's frequent, I would say, that it starts to sometimes feel a bit shoot in or, very convenience driven. It's very hard to keep the narrative fresh and interesting when you need to constantly be like introducing these new characters and to get them to become important enough to the story, and then to just have them kind of drop off later, or get relegated to side content or things like that. I believe what MiHoYo tends to do is they'll have little side stories for the characters that you kind of slowly unravel.
Yeah, that's correct.
Just to keep you coming back to your favorites. But in a more traditional RPG, for example, you don't have to keep churning out new characters time and time again. So you can actually have a core cast that you develop an entire gaming experience around. And I know for me, as someone who is lucky enough to not have that, some of like the personality traits that make me susceptible to gacha.
Right.
And these are things that just annoy me and get me to stop playing. Like, I will always, like, if a gacha game doesn't give me a character I really, really want, I will rage quit it, for example. I'm like, that is good for me, but unfortunately not everyone is like that.
Yep.
Hence how they get you to spend the money. But I know I always found the narrative approach to be very, very confusing. Usually they're kind of trying to make a lot of stuff happen, and a lot of the other gacha games I played, especially non-MiHoYo titles, but even with some of the MiHoYo games, you'll have kind of your standard cast of all of these free-to-play characters, and they all suck. Because I gave them to you for free.
Yeah.
So these characters are garbage.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, you can go online and you can get the best free-to-play strats to like optimize these characters or whatever. But it encourages you to use all of these new shiny, like, super rare characters. So you're like, I'm going through the story with like my core party, and they're the ones who are doing the talking. But then when I get in a fight, I'm throwing down with all of these like souped up, super super rare characters, and it's a huge disconnect.
It is, yeah. Although I will say that one thing I found interesting, again, as a recovered gacha addict, is that I am, as a game designer, intrigued to see how Star Rail will play their cards this time. Because one thing that a lot of other gacha players have said, and it does seem to be true, is that MiHoYo's free to play characters are actually banger, which is very, very affirming. Because again, the usual standard is they deliberately make them suck, including your main character, so that you end up pulling. But what happens with Star Rail is that your main character, sorry, spoilers if anyone's thinking of playing for some reason, your main character is always a 5-star in their design language, a 5-star super rare character, especially if you have the gear, and the gear is not hard to get in the game. That's the beauty of their actual design for him, her, however you wanted to spin him. And the 4-star characters that you have, um, they have really good, what do you call it, synergy within the party, and their hot mama Himiko is actually one of the best crowd control characters that you could ever play. And yes, I'm gonna bring my old Star Rail fan back and say, like, and you can fucking fight me on it, because I used to be a heavy optimizer. You know how I do FF14 raids, and I used to do Savage, and I know how to optimize my gear. I put all of that knowledge to use in fucking Star Rail, and she was amazing. And she was also very easy to pull and also very easy to get free. So it's fascinating to me to see the possibility that this big gacha company is actually listening with Star Rail. And while I have not played this, because again, I don't want to touch any gacha anymore, even if somebody tells me that the story is quote unquote good, I've heard that Zenless Zone Zero, the new
Zenless Zone
game.
Zero. I was actually
Yeah.
going to bring that up once you were done because I have played a
Okay.
bit of Zenless Zone Zero.
Okay, great. So then Liana can talk all about it. But yes, I've heard that ZZZ's like better or getting there. So anyway, go ahead.
Zenless Zone Zero is interesting. I do feel like it's probably one of the strongest narrative executions that I've seen in the
Fascinating.
gacha
Okay.
genre. And
Okay.
like, I will give credit where credit is due. MiHoYo's designers are doing their best to polish the turd that is their business model.
That's true.
They are doing what they can to make their games suck as little as possible, I guess would be the way to put it.
That's actually true. You know, one of the things that, like, before we go off about ZZZ, one of the things I've consistently heard from people who do not play gacha is that they wish that Star Rail and Genshin were, what, as in their words, okay, not mine, a proper RPG or a
Yeah,
proper action game.
I
Because
do too.
right, because they'd be so into it. Their concepts are really cool. Some of their characters are great. And if they weren't relegated to forever side content or mommy you bring out to save you in your God knows how hard content, right? Like, it would be fascinating.
Yeah, so I played a bit of Zenless Zone Zero,
Mhm.
although it also had some design issues, which we'll get
Right.
into a bit more when we get into some of the systems and progression.
Mhm.
Um, the way they handle it is your main character is a non-combatant. Your main character is the operator, basically, for those who've seen like
Okay.
The Matrix or whatever.
Okay.
Your character, kind of the backstories on the Zone Zeros, there are these like hollows, which are
Yeah.
like horrible, like magic subspaces that only certain people can exist in for extended periods of time before they turn into monsters. And your character is an operator, so they use these little like rabbit machines that they synchronize with
Okay, cool.
to guide the agents who can actually do the fighting through the hollows to complete objectives. Um, Pretty good setup. It means that you pick one of two siblings. There's a guy and a girl, so you get to kind of choose your gender. And they're both very appealing in their own way. Both of the characters are still in. Like
Right.
there was I got far enough to the point where my chosen character, Belle, she got trapped inside a hollow. So I had to play the guy, and I don't remember his name because it's a guy. Why would I care? uh, Only partially joking. But I had to pilot the brother
Uh-huh.
to rescue Belle
Okay.
and get her out of there. Um, And another thing it does is sometimes for like story quests, it will just have you synced and using like the story agents, which is kind of a double edged sword, in my opinion, because you don't get to use like all of the cool builds and whatever, but also your story
Okay.
progress isn't necessarily as locked to your level and progression when you can just
Right.
sub in your super strong um, premium characters who are just kind of there for the story because
Right.
the story involves them, and then they
Right.
go away later. Um, so I think that's probably about the best way to do it. But again, if it were just a normal action game where I'm playing through and I'm using a bunch of different characters when it comes in, I would be all over that
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
having to have all of the gotcha mechanics bolted on. Um, another game I actually played recently, because I am a sucker for tactics RPGs and strategy games, is a game called Sort of Convolaria, which I
Okay.
also
Yeah.
eventually rage quit. And they also were trying very hard to separate the storyline where you get like keys to unlock the story and you get some for free.
Oh,
So
okay.
you just
Okay.
kind of
Yeah.
play through the
Yeah.
story, and it has
Right.
its own
Right.
story mode where you can
Right.
like use three gotcha characters to just kind of port them in to help make your
Okay.
run easier.
Okay.
Um, but otherwise, you're just playing with story characters and you're like recruiting through your base mechanics. It's kind of neat.
Okay.
It gets old and repetitive after a while,
Mhm.
and also all of the storylines have what I will call the triangle strategy writing problem, where all of the bad endings really, really, really suck, and the good endings also kind of suck.
Oh no.
In
Okay.
that, like, multiple named characters who you might like will still die in most of the storylines, even if you get the good
Oh.
ending,
Oh man.
because eventually they're probably going to release an ending when the game sunsets if it gets that far.
Right.
Because like the whole thing is like you keep going back. You have the power to keep going back and trying to rewrite the timeline to get the good ending or whatever.
Oh, okay. That does sound like that should have been an interesting narrative mechanic. Okay.
Yeah, so you get
Okay.
to like
Gotcha.
you'll be picking a faction to
Uh-huh.
support, and each faction is varying degrees of like evil bastard with some good people. You know, like medieval
Okay.
politics. Like I dig
Right.
this
Right.
shit.
Yeah.
Games of Thronesy, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But then this game actually runs into issues when they start introducing new characters who just don't fucking show up in the storyline.
Oh, that's weird. All
So
right.
it's like, where
All
were
right.
you? And then you play through like the event storyline, and I'm like, oh, you just die at the end. So like you die in the side story, and you weren't even in the main story because they dropped a building on you.
Wow.
Well, yes, I am talking about the extremely butch character from one of the factions that I was I was building up this faction before I rage quit because this faction has a lot of lesbians, and I know what I'm
Wow.
about.
Literally bury your gay, huh? That sucks.
Yeah, I know. I'll show you the design later, but the character is named Simona,
Okay.
a member of the Knights Union. For those who want to look her up, but yeah, like she is extremely bush, like butch ice mage. Like I'm into this shit. Oh, and then you drop a building on her. Cool, love that. Um, so like you are seeing innovation with these games, but ultimately, yeah, they're just constantly hampered by having to introduce new characters. And like there are ways around it, but
Mhm.
it's just ultimately, and in my opinion, I don't believe it is possible to make Gacha be as narratively satisfying as a single player RPG or action game. Just because you don't have that control over cast and you can't even plan ahead that well because you don't have an ending. The best games end because you have an arc, you have a story, you have a satisfying conclusion, whereas a lot of these gotcha games just have to go on forever.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that just really hampers the story. Um, Before we move on, though, I did want to also make a side tangent. Um, One of the most frustrating things, and the reason why I continue to try to play gotcha games, is because gotcha games are the only game genre, subgenre I know of that tend to feature a lot of strong and interesting femme characters.
Mm. Mhm.
And it's very frustrating because it's very clear a lot of these characters are designed to be, you know, waifu bait, right? Like
Yes.
it's like
Yep.
we're gonna get the guys to open their wallets and spend money to pull these characters. But like me as a, a lesbian, like I'm yeah, okay, I'm weak to some of this stuff too.
Uh-huh.
But also just as a woman and as a feminist, I want to see well written, interesting characters existing in a world where them being women isn't a big deal.
Mhm.
And a lot of gotcha games have this just because they have so many women, to the point where I will see men constantly complain about how only the women are strong, which gives me a bit of schadenfreude, and they like, ha, now you know what it feels like, right? Like welcome to most of gaming.
Right.
But it's so frustrating that the only way I get to see strong, interestingly designed women excel and succeed in video games is often to pick up one of these predatory games that are trying to basically bait money out of the wallets of straight men.
Yeah, it's intriguing too because I prefer to look at gacha games less as games, but as a packaged experience for you, in that they are going into trying to build interesting lore around worlds, because that's the current format of Star Rail. Like, they want to make that game last for as friggin' long as possible, right? So how they do it, you are literally galaxy traveling, and there are many, many planets in a galaxy. I do not think I need to explain that scientific concept to you.
Honkai Star Rail is basically just Galaxy Express $999.
Exactly, exactly. And I was like totally into that shit when I first saw it, right? So they have their gods and they have their planets. So you could see the infinite possibility in that. So much so that when Star Rail started doing the back and forth of like, oh, you're going to go to funny Star Wars Chinese fleet. Oh, wait, no, you're going to go to the fucked up land of dreams. Oh, no, we're going back to China, right? Some people were actually upset at that move because they wanted to see the next world. Whereas when I was still playing, I was actually happy because they made their China zone a fleet with many different ships, and each ship is the size of a planet, and no one planet is the same. So they've already created their convenient narrative hook for actually every single zone is different. They feel different, you fight different in them, you have different characters with different aesthetics and different moves. So mechanically, narratively, story wise, character wise, it's all different. So they've given themselves an out to go on for literally ever and ever and ever until they get tired. And I know for a fact that I was playing Honkai Impact for a little while, and they have only recently concluded their story. So the current gacha in that game, and people can correct me if I'm wrong because it's been a hot second since I heard this. Um, they've given you a new main character, but you can still use your old stuff, which is
Oh, interesting.
fascinating, right? It's
Yeah.
fascinating. So they actually did bring a story to conclusion in the gacha format, which is again why I have a very interesting relationship with Mihoyo as a designer and as a player. It's like, I can see you guys doing cool things. Liana already said it. You know, you can see them make their games try to suck a little less in terms of how they are as an experience, right? And
I would love to see MiHoYo's team just be given a budget to develop a single player game. And I think that's what a lot of people who play MiHoYo games want to see.
and
Like
yeah, that's true because
I
honestly,
would I
I'd
would
I'd buy
buy
it.
I would buy a Genshin Impact that was just a single player game. I would
Me
do
too.
that.
Me too. I'd also buy a Star Rail hands down because Star Rail has so much cool things going for it. I'd even buy a ZZZ. It's just, and I'm terrible at action games. So that's a lot, right? Like, I would do it. I would learn those mechanics because.
CCZ
What?
CZZ mechanically is not especially challenging. Your mileage
Yeah, no,
may
you don't
vary.
understand. I'm really bad at things that aren't
It's
even mechanically
it's very
challenging.
it's very flashy and very like
Okay, gotcha.
dopamine hit, like
Right,
constant
right.
like character swapping, super moving,
Uh huh.
comboing enemies and stuff like that.
Uh huh.
At the end of the day, though, it's still just a stat chat.
Fascinating. Okay, that's oddly reaffirming to know. The other game that I wish they didn't make a gacha, but they had to because they had to compete, quote unquote, with Genshin Impact's influence is actually Wuthering Waves, the new hot kid on the block
Oh
for
yeah,
people.
yeah.
And I've played it. I'm gonna say some really mean things right now about it. Um, they really need to work on their scripts. Their scripts are terrible.
I'd heard that Wuthering Waves has some of the worst gotcha writing out there,
Yes. Oh
which is
my
an insult
god.
made so much worse in context.
Yes, right? Like, it is so bad that it gets to some points where it is so bad that any possible emotion you could feel will turn into laughter because it's that bad, right? And that's a shame because Wuthering Waves is actually the superior action game versus Genshin. I have played both. You can fight me if you want. They had so many quality of life changes and so many accessibility options and so many improvements that you have fun moving through their world. You want to challenge yourself to get good, so to speak, versus the torturous way that you'd have to climb, I don't know how many cliffs in Genshin and eat a lot of food in order to proceed. Wuthering Waves took that aspect, brushed it up, and made it hellishly fun. However, again, they got to work on their scripts. They got to work on their women because I know some guys are very happy with the titty physics, but I'm just like, if you give me another woman with variant red hair, variant blue hair, variant black hair, and you make her boobs jiggle in my face one more time, I will kill something. Okay. So it's not like I want the team to grow for other people who really like Wuthering Waves, but it's a shame because if they just took that story and put it in a proper game, I think we'd be a whole lot happier for it.
In fairness, MiHoYo breast physics are also awful.
They are.
Like,
Yeah.
tangent. I feel like we're probably gonna have a few of these. MiHoYo animates breasts like uninhibited jello molds,
They do.
where they're just kind of like always undulating, and like it's very upsetting if I have to like put a word to it. Like,
Honestly, if I had tits like a MiHoYo girl or a Wuthering Waves girl, I'd be three people with the way that those things move all on their own.
also, like, there's a reason women wear bras.
Mm-hmm.
It's because that is painful. Have your tits like
Just
jiggling
out
like
there.
that. One,
Yeah.
yeah, they wouldn't ever jiggle like that because they are flesh. Like, their breasts have weight. They're not made of jello, and you do want to constrain them if you're doing physical activities because it's not
Mhm.
comfortable to have them like parts of your body flapping around in the wind.
Yeah, and
Um,
their character designs don't really help, right? Because like a
no,
lot of
absolutely not.
right, because like a lot of my other girls who play Gacha are like, what is holding up her clothes? Like what? How, how is that working out for them? You
You're going to find out when you try to cosplay
know.
them. You're going to have to use your imagination and copious amounts of wire lining, probably.
Mhm. Yep. Hmm.
But honestly, though, all things said, narrative is probably the most fixable part of a
That's
gacha
true.
game.
That's true.
I don't believe it's possible to make it quite as satisfying as, a tailored experience that has a planned beginning, middle, and end. But
Right.
you can at least make gacha narratives decent.
Yeah.
Um, but now we're going to talk about something that you really can't seem to make decent in gacha, and we are now talking about character progression and story progression. As Pam intimated earlier, a lot of times your story progression will be locked towards pulling that one character who will carry you through a segment. Um, Already a very bad feeling in terms of like progression. But even from the start, and this is something I find exhausting whenever I attempt to start a new gacha game, which I will eventually learn my lesson and just not bother, but there's always something that can get you right because there's a gacha for every experience. And they're always going to have a lot of hot women for me to pull on, so like, yeah, okay,
They
guilty as
got you.
charged.
Yeah.
But like, the way gacha games handle progression does not feel good because you will get your starters and then they will dump a crap load of resources that you don't really understand onto you. And
Right.
then they'll kind of guide you through this, like, okay, now you need to level up your characters or whatever. And what's going to happen is you're going to level up all of your characters to their max level because you've got plenty of resources to do that. So it's like, okay, I guess this is what I'm supposed to do, right? If I've got 10,000 little doodads and I can max level my character for 200 of them, I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm going to max level my character. What else do you expect from me? And then you just kind of trivialize early content because you're just going to run through. And then eventually you will hit a wall. MiHoYo has actually been probably the best that I've seen at building that wall early for
Yeah.
you.
Hmm.
Um, so it doesn't feel quite so disjointed. Um, because what MiHoYo has figured out is you can trap higher level limits behind even more grind. And this is where it starts to suck. And Zenless Zone Zero, in my opinion, is actually very bad about this
Okay.
because Zenless Zone Zero has an extremely limited time currency, and you get pitiful amounts of level up or like advancement chips or whatever for whatever you're trying to do. So I played that game for maybe 2 weeks, and I was able to max level one of my characters.
Hmm.
Just keeping up with like my agent level and
Right.
story progression. Like I'm trying to keep current to the highest level that I can, and I was only able to like barely keep the one character maximized.
Right.
Especially too because they're so elemental focused, which is another frustrating thing Gacha games do. And that, like in a more traditional RPG, for example, you will have characters who will have an array of specialties that can slot into certain circumstances.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously, like some games, like certain tactics games, you can even do like subclasses, like Final Fantasy Tactics, one of my favorite games ever.
Right.
You can equip a whole like secondary ability set that you can level up, or in Final Fantasy X, you have a bunch of characters, all of whom have a very specific use, and then Kimari, who I love, but is discount Orin in terms of what his actual role is. He's there to deal with heavy creatures until you get Orin, and then you use Orin instead. I love you, Kimari. They did not design well around your existence.
Right. Right.
Um, but there's that party synergy, right? That idea of like you have a character for every situation. Like if it's a machine, you want Riku. If it's a fast wolf thing, you want Tidus. If it's something in the air, you want Waka to throw a dodgeball or a blitzball, excuse me, at it. Um, in a lot of gacha games, you're pulling for very specific niches upon niches. Like I have a fire character who wields a great sword, Diluc. So for that specific niche, he does that. And but then I'm gonna need like other characters to bolster and benefit that. And like there's some interesting things in that party design to be sure. I play Genshin the most out of any MiHoYo game. And
Hmm.
I had several different teams. Like I had a team with Diluc and Jean, the
Yeah.
wind
Right. Right.
commander. Um, and then like I had like my A team, which was like two lightning, two ice with the Chi Chi, the little Jiangxi girl,
Yeah. Right. Right.
um, the Chuni archer girl who summons the hawk, Fischl,
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
and then Ganyu and Kaching, who I to this day absolutely love her design.
Yeah. Same.
And had I still been playing when they released her formal address, I would have dropped $20 on that without question.
Right.
Um, but like they kind of they kind of want you to like max a bunch of different characters, but all of that takes time, and all of that is time gated, and it's really unsatisfying. Like especially with like that Zenless Zone Zero experience I was talking about, where I was like struggling to keep one character at level. All that did for me is make me feel like I couldn't really touch a lot of the game
Right.
because I needed to wait days to grind. Because they don't give you any like stamina refillers either. Like some games will just drop a bunch on you to let you get up, but they didn't even do that. They're just like, oh, you want to level up your characters? Okay, wait like a week, and then maybe you'll have one character.
It's intriguing too because like I heard from some people that one of the main reasons why they had the whole daily thing, right, is because they were trying to stop people from, or especially young people, from shelling out money for their energy repacks in order to continue. um Star Rail's a little bit better at that, in that they have managed to Well, if you overcap your energy, basically, it's you're allowed to do that, and you will retain all of the trailblaze energy that you have from all of the times that you haven't been playing. It's a little slower, but it's there, so you feel less pressure to log in every day and actually fix your characters. And they're mechanically speaking, how they did it is that each character has paths, and those paths do a specific thing. So if you have nihility, they're very good at things like dots, so damage over time. And you also have destruction, which is sheer destructive power. You have erudition, which is about crowd control, abundance for healing, then preservation for shields, etc., etc. And it's cool because here's the funny thing with the kind of ingenuity that you can see in players who are like very disciplined, as in they are the ones who will never spend money. They know that they're up against impossible, quote unquote, impossible walls. So what they do is they create spreadsheets that would shame anybody who does data analysis, and they will show you, hey, if you like this one character just because he's hot, here is how you can build him forever and a day. And then they update those things according to each patch. These are people you do not want to argue with when it comes to like, oh, this character sucks, because they will definitively show you the many ways that that character does not. So it's fascinating because on that side, on a game mechanics level, people may argue that, well, it fosters that kind of environment. But what I gotta say, as somebody who does game design, is why do you have to do that? If that is your fun, sure. But also, if you had a complete experience in a game, you probably wouldn't have to deal with that. But again, if it's, I'm not here to yuck your yum. I'm here to be as critical as possible, in that it is interesting to see people learn against that machine and help each other out. It's also interesting to see when companies realize that they need to treat their community better. And I'm going to go a little bit into how Hoyo has changed. And this created massive drama, by the way, of which I will probably send a link to Liana for our show notes if you really wanted to dig into that tea and waste literally hours of your life reading about it. But TLDR, Genshin fans mad because Star Rail fans very spoiled. That's the TLDR. Because Genshin fans, and y'all have probably known it if you've played it for longer, you don't get much in terms of free characters or free anything, really. Your reward for being loyal is, oh, here's some stuff, I guess, for our anniversary. Thanks for being here. What the Star Rail fans got for their anniversary was one of the best hunt characters you could ever possibly pull in your life for free. No questions asked. They were just like, you want Dr. Pretentious Hot Ratio? Here you fucking go, bitches. Enjoy. And mechanically, he was amazing. He was an element that very few people had. He was a hunt character with mechanics that at the time were not popular, but extremely good. So he literally could make your life easier as a free player for any content. All you had to do was level him up, and by the way, here's a fuck ton of free material constantly for you to do it. We're going to make it easy for you. So you can see on a historical level how, again, there are some companies out there that are like, we do gacha, but we got to take care of you, we guess. So here's some help. And then you also have a community that's very enthusiastic about it, and they will crunch your numbers for you. All you have to do is go to their website, check their guide. You don't even have to think. I guarantee you don't. Google it. You will have builds for up the wazoo. Or if you're like me and you have a best friend who is sweaty and does crunch the numbers herself, all you have to say is like, hey, best friend, I have this character. What do I do? She will ask you 10 questions, and bam, 24 hours, your problems are solved. Right. So it's fascinating. So that is the fun part, I guess, about dealing with the wall. But it is very, your mileage may vary. Is it good design? I don't think so, because it does create a lot of frustration. And at least in my experience, as you get older and you want to move on with your life and have experiences that don't give you that much pain, hassle, and time investment, there are many out there that you could be looking at and you could be doing, versus waiting for your energy to refill to get what is arguably the crumb of a story, and then waiting another month or two for another crumb of a story, which on a narrative level, design wise, is hard because you will see a lot of inconsistencies precisely because the show must go on for a gacha because they want to make as much money as possible before the game sunsets.
And that's I I can't in good conscience call this good game design because even if you look at, like you mentioned Elden Ring earlier,
Mhm.
like even if you look at those games, which are single player crafted experiences that are
Right.
hard
Yeah.
and do have a lot of community involvement of
Mhm.
people telling you to get good, but
Community.
like certain games will build themselves on that difficulty, whereas
Right.
for the gotcha experience, it's very clear what they're doing.
Right.
Just pulling back the curtain, finding that maximal frustration point to where you will spend money but not leave the game. It's I can't call it good design. I can call it diabolical design though, for sure. And that it is design to foster unhealthy behavior. And like ethically as game designers, we do have a responsibility to guide behaviors because this is something that game design can do. It can get you to act or think in a certain way. And it
Mhm.
is kind of is our responsibility to design games that will not make people do bad things like empty their wallets for you. Like that is bad. That is not that is not something that should be acceptable. And I don't like seeing game design being turned towards evil, but I have seen some of like what I will say is like the most diabolical, the most evil game design in some of these gotcha games, just because of how expertly they funnel your feelings and your frustration into the desire to open your wallet.
It's interesting too because in gotcha games, they're not even they're even if you spend money, see, there's not even an assurance that you're going to get what you needed. Genshin Impact fans and Honkai Star Rail fans are very painfully aware of the relic grind. Your gear is also a gacha. There are items that you can get and yes, buy in order for the chance of you getting the stats that you need. So you're buying for a chance. You're not buying for a surety. It is not like a sub in an MMORPG where if you buy it, you have full access. If you don't, you don't. Simple, right? For gacha, it's like maybe possibly you will get what you need. Possibly. There's a higher chance the more you spend money because that's how probability works, kids. But it's not going to ultimately save you, especially if you don't learn their game, which is another thing, again, too, because that is time investment. And sure, the argument I've heard is that, well, whales don't care. Some do, and that's why they spend. They don't actually just spend for their husbandos and waifus. They actually take it seriously and build their babies up. And if you even cared about the story, and you had a little bit of money, and you are susceptible to that for whatever reason, life is hard, it's your personality, etc., you probably will open your wallet, which really, really sucks, you know?
And I'm glad that you mentioned that because that was actually the next point I wanted to get to, which is progression system specifically.
Right.
Something I've found a lot, even in MiHoYo games. Obviously, caveat: yes, there are extremely talented buildsmiths who can work within the system, but I've found, by and large, MiHoYo games are very shallow in their character customization while having pretenses and appearances of being deep. MiHoYo games and many other gotcha games, for example, will usually have a number of gear slots that you can equip different things to. And as mentioned, like often they will have those relics with like these substats and all
Mhm.
of that you can kind of randomly grind for. But the big issue that you run into is a lot of times this is still just a stat stick.
Mhm.
Like, yes, there may be certain weapons or items, usually locked behind a paywall, that have abilities that you can use in specific circumstances
Yeah.
to change a tide in your favor if you follow very, 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 very specific instructions. But by and large, what you are going to get is you are going to get a bunch of options and one right answer. People will talk a lot about best in slot,
Mhm.
BIS.
Yeah.
For a game like Final Fantasy XIV, which Pam and I both play, um, best in slot is a solved problem. Everyone knows what the best gear is. It's published pretty immediately upon a patch dropping.
Yeah, about 24 to 48 hours, eh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there are needed subsets and whatever, and there is some grind. Like you have a weekly cap
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
tombstones, but
Right.
you're just paying $11 a month or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, in 14, there being a solved it being a solved problem isn't really a bad thing. It's just it's aspirational. It's like this is what I need. In a lot of these gacha games, because a lot of like equipment tends to be locked behind another gacha system, it's a solved problem that has a financial solution.
Yeah. A financial solution, a time sink, or both, which is a
Um,
problem.
well, and like when I was playing sort of Convalaria, they drop a lot of free legendary tier weaponry on you.
Okay.
So that was kind of cool about that, and that they
Right.
know that they're kind of playing to a niche, so they need to give you stuff.
Yeah.
So like you will generally expect to be able to get all of the weapons and whatever, and then you can kind of work to optimize. It's a tactics game, so like there's actually a certain degree of strategy in there.
Right.
Um, but I noticed when I was playing Genshin, most of the best weapons are the 5 stars, and you're competing with characters, or you're just pulling on weapons, which means you don't get your waifu or husbando.
Hmm.
So like
Hmm.
that's basically like this is a banner only for the whales who want to actually optimize their character.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, don't expect to get like I got one legendary weapon, which was a spear that was supposed to be really good for Zhao, but then I never drew Zhao, so it's like
Thanks, I
okay,
guess.
Xiaoling or whatever her name is. I got
Yeah.
the little fire chef girl who
Yes.
doesn't
Yeah.
really attack with this attack spear. I guess I'm gonna toss it on her then. I don't know
Well,
what else I'm gonna do.
yeah, Wuthering Waves also used the weapon system. They were a little better at it than Genshin was, and the fun thing, at least with Star Rail, is that if I'm remembering correctly, they do not have a weapon banner. You get weapons or character because they have cards, right? The
Mhm.
light cones. There you go. And their light cones, the typical gacha format, right? You got your standard light cones. They will come in the standard pull. Then you have the special light cone. If you really want to spend for it, sure, cool and good. Then you have the character banner, and then of course our light cone comes up with the character banner. One thing I will give Star Rail credit for is that actually you do not need a single one of the premium light cones in order to pass any of the hard content. Um, I know this because I have crunched the numbers with my friends. You don't need any of those light cones. So you literally have to be an obsessive whale or like the art to spend for it. But you actually don't need it to pass any of the story, any of the hard content, and do it well, as in at the top levels, which is revolutionary to hear from a gacha
Right.
because usually, right, you need those things in order to progress, right? And then I forgot, I'll need to double check this, but I know Fate Stay, one of the oldest gacha games ever,
Fate
is,
Grand Order.
yeah, there you go. So of course I'm thinking about the anime because reasons. Fate is doing this thing, or I think it's another game. I'm not sure which one, but a gacha player friend of mine told me that they're taking their legacy characters and upgrading them for free. So they've solved their power creep in an intriguing way. They're
Fire Emblem
rewarding.
Heroes would do that too, actually.
Okay, cool, right? So at least, if you pull them, you don't feel bad about the power creep because now you got a free upgrade and they can go toe to toe with your current characters, whoever they may be. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Fire Emblem Heroes is actually one of those examples of like as a strategy game.
mhm,
I played that one for probably as long as I played any gacha.
interesting.
because they do this skill inheritance system, which is very
Okay.
interesting. Because like you do
Okay.
actually like it's one of the few gotcha experiences I've had where build does really, really, really matter. But
Interesting.
like the skill power creep was absurd, and to inherit skills, you need to sack a
Oh.
basically a UR character.
Oh. Huh.
So you sack this character, and then you can give 3 of their skills to another character. And they have to be
Oh.
compatible too. So like if I am a red sword, I can take another character's red sword, unless that sword is unique to that character, which might also be a case. Or I can take one of
Oh.
their other special skills. So it's very
Okay.
interesting,
Okay.
but again, it's financially motivated because you have to pull a lot. And one of the things that kept me with Fire Emblem Heroes is that their UR rate, their 5-star rate in this case, was actually fairly generous
Mm-hmm.
in that it was 3% base and it goes up by 0.5% for every 5 pulls you do.
Oh, huh. Versus the 0.0 blah 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 blah
Yeah,
that you
exactly.
usually get.
Um,
Okay,
yeah,
interesting.
up until you either the banner ended because pity travels with the banner.
Right.
So there's the FOMO aspect, right? Of fear of
Right.
missing out, where
Yeah.
if you've built up a pity, you want to dump money until you draw something, um, or until
You
you draw a 5-star, and then it resets.
you reminding me of Pity is also like, in case you didn't all already know, they made Pity because I think it was a Fate streamer who dropped millions of yen, was it, to get a character and did not. That was years ago, and a lot of people got really mad, and that's why you have Pity,
Yep.
because a real life incident forced companies to quote unquote behave. So,
Well, one of my formative gotcha experiences is I played Final Fantasy Brave Exvius
oh, okay, yeah, I
for
heard about
about a
that game.
year. It was one of like
Right,
the first.
right, right.
I'm a big Final Fantasy fan.
Yeah.
I'm a big Final Fantasy Tactics fan. I saved most of my resources throughout the entirety of my play. I would occasionally pull a bit on banners just to like try and get some 4-stars, which wasn't too hard. Like if
Hmm.
an interesting 4-star came up, I would get it. But I'd saved a majority of my resources since launch. About a year in, they had finally made it so that pulling a rainbow crystal guaranteed you like the shiny 5-star, because
Uh-huh.
they hadn't before. I'd pulled one rainbow crystal and it was just a 5-star iteration of a basic character before like even the shiny 5-stars existed. So then they start making 5-stars exist, but also you can pull almost any other random character in the pool as a
Right,
5-star.
right.
Finally, they changed that mechanic so that it's a guaranteed. And then they bring on one of the characters I knew was strong, both because the character in Final Fantasy Tactics, Adolphus Orlando, is broken as shit.
He is a hundred
The Thunder
percent.
God Sid.
Yep.
Final Fantasy 14 players will have who played Stormblood on launch will have additional trauma from that raid series
Oh, 100%.
where they
Yep.
did my boy right and that they
Yep.
made
Yep.
him obscenely difficult.
I became a
Um,
very good player because of that man.
yeah,
Yeah.
he was a alliance killer in that you have 24 people and none of you make it out of that fight alive.
You're saying was still is. It's wild.
Yeah, they've nerfed him several times, but so this character comes up
Uh-huh.
on the gotcha. There's a guaranteed 5-star, so you have a 50-55. I dump every single resource I had ever spent, and because they have a 1% rainbow star rate, I got one 5-star character out of all of those resources that I had saved up. And it was a mage character, and mages sucked in that game. It was one of the originals to that game.
Oh no.
I quit immediately. I
Of
just
course.
uninstalled the game because that is the kind of player I am. Where if you don't give me what I want, I will just quit.
You'll leave.
Yeah, I leave. But a lot of people won't, right? They will stay, and that because a lot of these progressions are so character dependent, you have to have that. You have to spend money on the character, or now in our much better modern design. You have to spend the money on the character and also the weapon that they need.
Yeah.
And then maybe you'll need like 5 copies of it or like 5 copies of the character, because that's something that miHoYo really introduced, is like multiple copies of a character make that character stronger. But a lot of it is linear, and a lot of it is financially driven.
Mhm.
It's, I can make this character better, but I will have to get multiple copies of that character, and then it's not a build decision. It's just I drew another version of this character, so they get objectively better,
Yeah.
and on and on and on.
Because you can't really target it unless it's a special character, at least in Star Rails. Star Rail and Genshin Impact focused, right? Because if it's a standard banner, then, well, good luck trying to get their Eidolons, because you're competing not just with their light cones, but also with, I think, the 6 or 7 other characters on that spread.
Mhm.
So you're either very lucky, or it's totally by chance that you happen to have the most awesome Bronya you could ever have, because she kept coming up and she kept coming home, right? Like, either way, and you have to build your team around it. So yes, on the one hand, wow, creativity. On the other hand, why are we here, right?
It's, in a good game design, you want to, in good game design, in non-toxic game design, we'll say, you want to reward players for being creative, and you want to just give them the tools that they need to be creative and to overcome challenges. In a lot of gacha games, you reward spenders with these options. The the enhanced difficulty comes for people who dare try to play without spending much money. Because again, like, even if you spend some money, it's generally not going to be enough.
It's not.
Like, pulling one of these characters could easily run you hundreds, if not thousands, of dollars.
If you wanted, you could all hear the exact breakdown that I remember, because again, I used to be a dolphin.
Well,
So
yeah, let's
right.
get into that real quick. Like, how much did it cost to get 10 pulls? Do you recall?
Oh, 10 pulls would be about, I mean, 10 pulls is easy, quote unquote easy with money, right? Because it's about $13, if I remember
Okay,
correctly.
let's do the math. I've
Wait,
got
hold
Team
on.
Monitors here. I'll
10
pull up a
pulls?
calculator.
I'm almost like tempted to bring out my Star Rail account,
Yeah,
because like the thing with it is,
I'm
if
not going to
you,
ask you to do that. I don't want you to
yeah,
put that into your life.
yeah, please no. But like, you got 10 pulls for about $13, but then if you wanted, let's say, the full swing, right? You wanted a good chance of getting this character, which would mean about 50 to 80 pulls. That's already about 139 Canadian.
We'll say 80.
Right.
So $13 times $13 for 10 pulls times 8, right?
Yep.
So that's $104.
Yep.
However, that's not a guarantee, is it?
It's not, because you already mentioned guarantee is 50-50. And sure, they're going to try to like make the sting of your defeat easier by going, well, you can carry it over, because if you fail the guarantee, then it really will be guaranteed, but you're going to have to pull them maybe 80 to 120 times on the chance of getting it.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Was it 180 pulls for your guarantee, or was it
uh
120?
well, if you're really lucky and you got the 50-50 right away, it could be anywhere between 80 to
I don't
90
care about that though.
pulls.
I care about a guarantee. How
Like a
many
total
pull? Yeah.
guarantee.
How many pulls maximum do you have to go through to get the character that you want? When I was playing Sword of
Well,
Convalaria, it was 180, which leads me to believe that it's similar, if not exactly the same, in Genshin Star
it'd be
Rail.
about 100 to 120 pulls.
We'll say 120. Okay,
Yeah,
so 120 pulls. 10 pulls is $13,
thereabouts.
so that will be 12 of those. $13 times 12, 156 for one character. I could buy Breath of the Wild and still have money left over to buy, I don't know, Trails Through Daybreak, which is like 100 hours and also a really good game.
Honestly, speaking from the controversies that have come out about gacha and fandom spaces, that could also pay for your groceries, guys.
Yeah,
Right? Honestly, I've heard a lot of horror stories. I know someone got run out of the Persona 5 fandom because they essentially stole all of the money for a fan work and used all of that money, which was 5 figures,
yep, I do remember this.
right, to pull on Genshin Impact. That's not beyond it being very criminal, that's not human. That's not great on a human level,
It's
right?
very
So
criminal, but also you usually in cases like that, you're dealing with someone who has an addiction, which these games unfortunately do exploit. God, I was trying to keep us sticking to game design, but it's hard not to just talk about how scummy all of this is.
it's really not because, like you already said it, right? As game designers, you have a responsibility in your hands to assure that your players will lean into certain behaviors and you hope that they are not bad behaviors, right? And then if you go to the wider industry as well, I can't speak about Mihoyo, I do not know their company, and I don't know how they treat their people. But widely, the video game industry really friggin' sucks. You have people that are being laid off regularly. They're highly talented, and they're going nowhere. Right? You've got people who want to go in, and they are spending so much time learning all of the skills, and they cannot break the barriers because the people who already are supposed to be there do not have jobs and are all competing with you. So, and then you can also, the other thing here with the ethics of game design is, sure, you can say things like, oh, but I'm supporting the creators, but are you really? Do you do the research on the company? Are they paying their people right? Who knows? There are there's a huge chance rather that you're paying to support the company, but the people who made your game are gone and they won't
Oh,
be coming back,
absolutely.
right? So
People will make that excuse all the time. That came up a lot during the Blizzard issues when
correct,
Blizzard was
correct.
laying people
Yeah,
off. It's
right,
like
right.
something people don't necessarily understand. The people who made that game, they've been paid already. People who make games get a salary. They don't tend to get royalties anymore,
Yeah.
um, which is another issue entirely. But they, yeah, they put in their work. They got their paycheck. Hopefully, they're still with the company. They may not be. Like Dragon Age Veilguard just came out, and not to like throw too many stones at BioWare, but like BioWare laid off most of the core writers to the
Yes.
Dragon Age setting
Yeah.
before Veilguard came out. The woman who wrote and created Varric, one of the most beloved and, according to my straight female friends, fuckable dwarves, uh, to ever grace the pages of fiction, that writer is gone.
Yeah.
So, like, it's not for us as consumers and for us trying to be ethical consumers in this nightmare that is modern existence. I'm going to support the creators is kind of a pretty lie to tell ourselves, because the creators have been paid and the creators may have already been laid off. You are supporting a company, and especially with these gacha games, you are supporting a company who has, with intentionality and purpose, chosen to design a game that will frustrate you until you spend more money on it
Or until you leave.
or until you leave.
Or until you spend again, like, right, and let's talk about sheer investment, right? Or if you want to spend hours and hours and hours of your life researching, trying to cross their barriers, like, take your pick, right? It's either until you spend, you leave, or you go full on in and they've got you. Right.
And like talking about time, because this is another intersection of toxic game design that I think is very important to discuss is time sink. When I when I started playing Sword of Convallaria,
Uh-huh.
just like, all right, I'm going to play this game immediately because I am someone who wants to optimize and who understands game design enough to optimize.
Right.
I was writing a personal living schedule around finding time to play this game.
Okay. Yeah.
And this is
Yeah.
a mobile game, a
Right.
game that is on my phone, but also on my computer
Right.
because I had it on Steam. So I linked all my accounts and I would play it on my computer too. But like, I started actively thinking about how I would spend the energy, right? The time gated resource to ensure that I was performing most optimally. And that, even though I am capable of doing it to myself to an extent where it's not super disruptive, it's noticeable
Mhm.
because you are constantly in the back of your mind thinking about this game that requires you to keep coming back to it, to keep spending time on it if you want to optimize it, and especially if you don't intend to pay too much money
Right.
into this game, it becomes that much more important that you do spend every available minute of resources doing something quote unquote useful in the game. And like that in of itself, like even saying it aloud, it feels absurd. Like, oh yeah, this free phone game I am now setting my schedule around. I knew someone in the early days of Love Live who would set alarms on her phone in the middle of the night to get up and burn down her energy so that she didn't overcap overnight. That's absurd.
And it's funny too because for people who might argue, well, other games have that too. You see those other games, and yes, I'm talking about FF14, right? You do not actually have to do the raid series. You do not actually have to do etc. 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 You do not have to raid extreme, savage, ultimate, take your pick. It is deliberately pigeonholed into optional content. You miss nothing by never tapping into that hard aspect of the game
You
for your
don't even have to do the
entire.
normal difficulty raids if you don't
You
want
don't.
to.
You really, really don't. You could
Unless it's
literally.
Crystal Tower, which is not difficult.
Yeah, okay, yeah, fair, right? Like you don't have to do any of that. You could sub, you could play the story, you could leave for the next 4 to 6 months to a year,
A
come
large
back.
amount of our of 14 players do that actually. Like they sub
Exactly.
in, they play the story, and then
They
they leave.
leave. They leave. They have other things that they're doing in their life, right? Like, but with gacha design, because they want you to see the story and you probably want to see the story, these are the barriers and the hurdles that you have to hoop in increasingly creative and time sinky ways in order to get there.
Yeah, and like that's the thing too. Using 14 as a comparison. Again, it is a sub game, but like you're getting the content and whatever. Like it's a weekly gate, so it's like sometime during a week you should try and do these things to get these resources to whatever. But you don't have to. Didn't. I didn't get any tombstones last week just because I was busy.
Yeah,
And
same.
what do I miss? Well, I don't raid, so it doesn't mean anything
Doesn't
to
matter.
me.
Yeah.
My numbers don't go up quite as fast, and that sucks from a bigger numbers make my brain go happy. But I don't need it.
Yeah, you don't.
And if I were hardcore content rating, I would obviously, yeah, I would be setting some time aside to do that. But it's also not hard because 14 is the intentionality of 14's design is to respect your time to the
Not every.
point
Yeah.
to the point where some players will complain that there aren't enough grinds to do,
Which
which
is
is
really funny because if you look at some
right.
other MMOs, right, they make you stay,
It's
and it's
mandatory. Yeah.
miserable, right? It's absolutely miserable.
Yeah, like one of the biggest controversies in kind of the fan space over the last expansion, for example, is a certain mechanic called the relic weapon,
Right.
which a relic weapon is something in 14 that you grind for. So you have to run a bunch of content and whatever.
Mhm.
The two recent relic weapons had whole new zones that you had to kind of run, and they had like special extra leveling mechanics,
Yep.
their own storyline that you could run through, of which I did exactly one of because I am owned by Yasumi Matsuno and his writing. So I did Baja. You could not pay me to do Eureka because that was obnoxious and grindy, and I didn't want to. But I could. I had that choice. And then in Endwalker, they just made it a straight tombstone grind. So like
Right.
something you're already doing. And people
Yep.
hated that
Yeah.
because they wanted something meatier to sink their teeth into. And it's not to say that we didn't get other content, as I'm always quick to remind people. We did get other content. It was just not necessarily content that other people liked as much, and
Right.
it wasn't as grindable because like they had this island sanctuary thing, which is kind of neat. I still play it. I still run my own sanctuary. It's a good source of in-game currency because I can get special dies or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yep.
Um, but not quite as engaging, much more casual. There was like this deep dungeon thing that tends to run
Yeah.
a bit more for hardcore players. So they did that. They introduced a new variant dungeon system, which is
Yeah.
very interesting, but I don't think a lot of people ended up engaging with. And kind of these cool like 4-person
Yeah.
duties where you have like 13 different paths and you got to kind of figure out like what's gonna
happen? Yeah.
happen to make the path. And then there are also like hard and super hard versions of these where it's like where it becomes close to the high end content. But like that's kind of their philosophy, right? It's like here's a bunch of stuff and you can sub or not.
Yeah. And that they're always going to be there too,
yeah.
at least until the sunset of the game. Like you literally
and
can
when
pick
you
it up later.
and when you sub, you can generally go back and do all of that. There's very little content that has been fully removed.
Yeah.
Diadem being the big thing that got repurposed into a crafting zone later on. So it's like it's still there, but they completely repurpose it so you can't go back and play the old version.
Yeah.
Or like older versions of raids that they've updated to make them suck less, which you can't go back and play the old version, but why would you want to? It's that difference in designing for like key frustration points, which again is toxic design, is malicious.
That's a gacha
design.
bread and butter, right? Like you are a money bag, or you are an investment in time, versus you are a human who is occasionally a player, but mostly human, right?
The analogy I am inclined to use is you are their money piñata.
That's true.
Because they know they have to hit you a certain amount of times to get it, but if they hit you too hard, they will break it, and that will be a problem. So you are literally there to experience getting hit by the company over and over again until you give them what they want. But the game that they're playing with you, a living person with hopes and dreams and rent to pay, is that they can only abuse you so much, and they have to find that perfect level of abuse.
To find the sweet spot. Yep. Yeah.
To get the money out of you, but to not break you.
Yeah.
And that is shit. But all that said, we have plenty of other things to talk about. Because to round off this episode, I wanted to talk about enforced PvP, which is one of Gacha's greatest frustration points, in my personal opinion. I'm trying to recall, does MiHoYo do too much of this?
Which part? What do you mean by
enforced PvP?
What do you mean?
Where they make you like match up against other people in stats or resources or something.
No, interestingly, Star Rail does not have that.
I don't remember Genshin having it.
No, Genshin does not either.
Genshin actually took a bit more of the MMO aspect where you can just party up with people.
Yeah, and in Star Rail, you can get support characters from your friends. So one very easy way to game that is you get your one sweaty friend and you constantly pick their character and all of your problems are solved. But that said, not all of the content allows that. So they will still force you to go back and actually get good, basically.
Right. So this will probably be mostly me complaining then, because I would play some of the tactics style games, like Fire Emblem Heroes, like sort of Convolaria.
Right.
And they all have a PvP mechanic which locks premium resources that you can use to pull characters.
I really hate that. Yeah.
So performing well in these mechanics, sort of Convolaria did kind of okay-ish.
Okay.
In that they made it so that you can run kind of the easier sets and still generally rank what you needed. But at least when I was playing Fire Emblem Heroes, you had to go up against other people's teams. And the teams, you had to clear their team without losing any person, and you had to do it 7 times in a row.
Okay.
To get the maximum reward that you wanted.
So
you need to do 7 fights, and you can never lose a single character in these fights. And
okay,
if your team beats another team, you get rewarded. Technically, sort of Convolaria did do that too, but the reward was so paltry that some people would actually just set up freebie teams to fight against. but not great.
Yeah.
Because generally, as a free to play player, if you are optimizing, you're going to reach the point where you are just going to have to go up against bigger statistics than you.
Yeah.
And Fire Emblem Heroes was notorious about this. Fire Emblem Heroes is probably like the worst arena I've ever encountered because you had to do that. And if you were ranking high enough, you were going up against whales who had all of like the most perfect diabolical fiendish abilities ever.
Yeah.
And you just had to live with that. So, and this is again in the cycle of abuse here. This is them basically shoving in your face that there are whales out there who are better than you because they've spent the money. But also it is a retention mechanic for the whales, because for the whales it feels good to have their characters or their party or whatever be
Right.
victorious over other people.
Right.
So that creates this kind of necessary feedback where the smaller fish are routinely sacrificed to the biggest spenders. So you get the experience of being a minnow there to be eaten by the great white of the oil baron or whatever, who's just spending money like water on this game,
That
which,
really
and I
bothers
will
me.
remind you, is
Yeah.
a cell phone game that
Yeah,
doesn't actually have nearly the level of content of a game that you could buy off the shelf for $60.
yeah, I think Liana has already learned in confidence that I really do not like PvP, and that comes from frankly trauma. Being a femme queer body in primarily mask spaces where guys do not like it if you show any kind of competence unless they were the ones who supposedly taught you, and even then they get jealous, or you're a target.
Heaven forbid you ever be a man who taught you how to play a game.
Yeah, and then there's also a lot of friggin' weird biases, right? Again, used to be a savage trader, and when I was talking to a potential employer, and he learned that I like FF14, he seemed utterly bamboozled that I was a competent Dark Knight because girls do not play tanks. Right. I
Bullshit, by the way. One of my mains is Paladin, thank you
I
very much.
I know, right? So
You can't give me pretty sword effects like that and expect me to not play the Paladin. I'm sorry.
exactly. So like it's hard for me to engage in PvP of any kind because lots of different experiences in fighting games, in strategy games, like actual ones with models and stuff, and like even Counter-Strike, I tried that for a long time and it utterly sucked. I dipped into some MOBAs. It was also painful. I just do not like playing against other players because there's always that fear at the back of my head that I am going to be harmed and abused, right? And games can go, "Oh, but you're going to get this. Oh, we've reduced their chat. Oh, there are safety measures." And I'm like, cool and good. But like for me, please make your PvP stuff optional so that I don't have to think about it. And if I happen to be in the mood and in the safe space where I can be in control, that is when I can go for it, right? If you enforce it, Liliana's analogy was perfect, right? I do not want to be a small fish being eaten by a great white. Like that is very frustrating to me, and I do not ask for that kind of treatment.
Yeah, and honestly, a lot of PvP games will do that too, where
Yeah,
they'll,
right.
there's complex matchmaking algorithms, and as we all know from having been on Twitter, algorithms are perfect and can do no wrong, right? Um, but often in PvP games, even without like that financial pain incentive, you will get matched against people who just wipe the floor with you, and that's just part of that life.
And be mean about it. It's
Oh,
fine
absolutely.
if it's all good and cool and good. But how many times have you actually met a competent player who wasn't an asshole?
But then add that money aspect on top of it with Gacha, and it
Uh-huh.
becomes so much worse,
Literally predatory, not just emotional.
because like it's one thing to lose because I wasn't skilled enough.
Yeah,
It's another thing entirely to lose because that person spent more money than I did.
yeah,
That was actually like, because again, I've tried a number of gachas in my life from someone who admittedly kind of hates gacha.
yeah.
Um, I like rhythm games. I think they're fun. I hate that the only rhythm games that seem to come out are either arcade, which makes that hard,
Right.
or gacha, phone
Yeah.
gacha, because I don't like to play a song on a harder difficulty perfectly and be told that I didn't win because it enforces a PvP where you're put in a party with four other people
Yeah.
or three other people, four people total, and it will say who like the winner is, right?
Yeah.
And then have the winner of the song be someone who missed all these notes but had a high stat character that they won with.
That bites.
That is, if I'm playing a rhythm game, I want to hit all of the notes perfectly and then to be told how good I am at hitting the notes perfectly. I don't want to be told that the person who spent more and very clearly did worse on the song, as you show me the metrics right after the stage. I don't want to be told that they won because they spent money. Like,
Yeah.
that is a garbage feeling.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't play D for DJ anymore. But at the crux of this, because I think now we have truly covered all of the pain points and topics I wanted to bring up. Pam, you are free to jump in if you got more. But like at the crux of this, we as designers, as game designers, we do have a responsibility. Like we want to be making games ethically. We want to be making games that are fun, that are challenging, that are interesting, that will engage a player, will make them think. All of these things are good. But the minute you introduce this gacha system, this monetization system into it, your priorities shift. And it shifts it in a very toxic way, where your game design no longer becomes about engaging a player
Yeah.
and wanting them to enjoy their experience and keep coming back. Your incentive now becomes, how can I beat the pinata just enough to get the money, but not so much that I break it? And that's a shitty situation for both the player and for the designer, if you want my honest opinion.
Right.
A lot of us who design games, we are passionate about this, right? Like, I know for Valor, I wanted to create something where people could have fun and who could like make any kind of character they wanted and like shout attack names at the table or like, do cool monologues and like just act super anime and just have a great time. Like that was one of the core driving principles behind Quinn and my design when we made Valor, is we
Right.
wanted a game that is fun to play and interesting to design around. And I am monetizing it, obviously. I own my company, I'm trying to sell it, but my incentive is, I made a game that is super fun, and here's all of the cool shit you can do in it. You should buy it. And that is how I sell, and that is how I make my money, and that is how I incentivize it. Pam, I imagine as much as the same for you. Like you work with a lot of different companies, but in general, I would assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume that people want you to make good content that engages players, that makes them enjoy it themselves, or like makes them think, or makes them terrified for their life in the right places, depending on what system and what kind of style you're designing for, right? Like I assume that's kind of the goal.
It is. It's also the goal to try to introduce new people. That tends to be the trend with the areas that I've been hired in, to introduce new people to the hobby or introduce new writers and new voices into something that is usually quite old, right? Like D&D or something like Pathfinder and Starfinder, where they're making very strong pushes to change what once existed into something new and fascinating and different and more representative of the diversity that exists in the world outside of the white bubbles of Canada and America, right? Like you also saw that as well with some of the new books from Renegade for World of Darkness. Like Hunter expanded a lot in the two projects that I wrote for. Werewolf was also very different, although I did hear that there were some problems, so I can't speak to that. But you could see,
Werewolf has traditionally had a lot of
yeah,
cultural appropriation issues, as
It
has
has.
Vampire. Vampire has.
Yes. A lot, right?
Well, I
But
mean, we Asians Represented a live read of Kindred of the East. I don't think they
yeah,
got through it, but you can check that out if you want to see
I I
how bad
remember
some
that
of White
book.
Wolf stuff can
Yeah,
get.
I remember that book more than I should. Uh, but you're right. The point is that, if you want to be that kind of shit designer, I don't even know why you're listening to this recording, right? If you want to be that kind of designer, fine. Not going to judge you. Don't judge me. Let us be like ships passing in the night. Okay. But if you are somebody who does, even for a smidgen, care about making a world, making an experience, making something engaging. It does not necessarily have to be fun, right? Because some games will hurt you. Some games are painful. They are meant to be that way, in the same way that not every book you will read or movie or series that you will watch is going to be a fun, happy, rose filled time, right? But games can tell stories in ways that other mediums cannot. And a lot of the narrative of your game is dependent on how you design your systems and your mechanics to lend towards that story. And it is extremely hard to build something compelling, something engaging, something that is as ethical and least harmful as possible in a gacha system. Because as a designer, if you are working for one of these companies, if you do not turn your players into the pinatas, why are you here? Which means you'd probably be out of a job, right? And if you want to continue with that, cool. I'm sure you got rent to pay, etc., right? But if you don't want to continue that, then perhaps that's why you're listening to us, right? How do you? Let's expand the discussion a little bit, and we probably don't have time to go into this, but it is food for thought. Perhaps one thing you can do as a designer is understand the difference between good design, good ethical design, or at least a design that tries to be, versus predatory design. This also applies to tabletop too. What are the things in your game that are dehumanizing your player? Then you're not honoring their time, their emotion, their experiences, and also, frankly, their intellect. Are you infantilizing your players? Are you giving them the right tools? Are you doing everything that you can as a designer to ensure that they have the kind of experience that you were hoping to design around?
And that ultimately is something that will require a lot of work and play tests. As a designer, it is our responsibility to play the games that we make, to make sure that the feelings and emotions we want to convey with the experience that we've designed work.
Yes.
So testing, planning, iterating, that's always going to be part of it. But I wanted to wrap this up just by going kind of recapping a bit and going over some of the things to look out for these toxic designs. Um, as we talked about, obviously, if it's a gotcha game, that in and of itself is a warning. If there's a system in which you have to draw for characters, you know what you're getting into. We're all adults here, but understand that these systems are part and parcel of what come with it. But when you are playing games, you do want to look out for things like, is the customization system here to provide depth, or does it exist to drain more of my time, drain more
Mhm.
of my mental resources, drain more of my emotional energy? Does this event or game or whatever, when I am playing it, am I playing it on my terms, or am I playing it on the game's terms?
Yeah.
Games that set a schedule for you are much more likely to have a toxic impact on your life. Um, a game really shouldn't ever do that to you, unless it's your weekly D&D game, and you can only meet one time a week when all the kids are in bed or
Yeah,
whatever.
any
Like, yeah,
tabletop,
that's
right? Yeah.
that's just life. But
Yeah.
especially in the digital space, games should not require that much scheduling tabletop RPG caveat here. They should be times in which you are seeking whatever the game has to offer on your terms.
Yes.
So always watch out for that. And any time a game says you can make this easier or less frustrating by spending a little money, that's a red flag.
100%.
Because what that says is I, the game designer, understand that this experience has been frustrating to you, and I have determined that I'm going to keep doing this to you and entice you to spend money to get around it. And if they've done one thing to frustrate you, to try and tempt money out of you, you can expect that that will happen again and again and again. And the frequency will only rise the further that you get, because the more time and the more personal, emotional investment you put into these games, the more hooked you become, and the more likely you're going to be to open your wallet. And they know that. And when you see these systems and you see them doing this to you, understand that they're very aware of what they have done, and they're fine with it, and they're going to keep escalating it to you until you break.
Yeah, that
I
about
mean,
covers it. Yeah.
Pam, you're not playing Honkai Star Rail anymore.
No.
Your extremely cracked Bronya means nothing, right?
Yep. Basically, I had a really good time. I did, but I got a lot of bills to pay, and I have a lot of other games that I would rather be playing right now on top of doing real life. You all already know that I'm obsessed over FF14. That's not going to change. I also have a new MMO called Palia, which, by the way, is free. The only time that you spend money is if you want to buy a costume that does nothing. So, if you want that costume, sure, but they did not monetize a single aspect that would make your life easier. The only way for you to quote unquote make your life easier in Palia is to engage. And a lot of that engagement is low impact. There is no combat at all. Nothing. So if you wanted a totally relaxing fantasy of you actually owning real estate in this capitalist hellscape and building a cute house, go to Palia, right? So I got a lot of things. I have moved on. I do not think I'll be touching Gacha again, no matter how pretty they are. And I'm happy for some of the challenges that I've had to navigate, whether or not I spent money. Because yes, I spent money, but I also try to get good. So those things make me happy. But I'm also really happy to close that door in my life because, like, again, gachas are really good at making you feel good temporarily when you're down and out and you're in a bad place. And coming from that very slight to possibly worrisome addiction, I'd rather not be in that place anymore.
Especially as the world gets darker and things continue to get worse, and we have ample evidence that things are going to get pretty bad before anything ever does improve.
Especially for us designers who are just designers or designers who are marginalized like me and Liana, right? It will get harder. And I would encourage people beyond the points that Liana has made to really think about your place as design. Is this still for you? And if it is, why? And why? How are you designing to make your space in the world a better place? Because we will absolutely 100%, 250% need that.
Yeah, and it's just, it might feel good to buy that dopamine hit from these draws or whatever, but a lot of us can't bear that cost right now. And it's important that we arm ourselves with the knowledge to be able to detect them, avoid them, and move on to things that will give us more meaningful joy, both in the games we play and in the lives we live.
Yep.
But with that all said, thank you so much, Pam. I'm always delighted to have you join me for our Asians Rep episodes. I know you'd done a bit of hosting for us, but
I have.
even after stepping down, I'm not allowing you to escape us that easily. But where can we find you?
So do not look for me on Twitter. I have left that account. It is still alive, yes, but it's only alive for me to remind you that I am no longer there. I am primarily on Blue Sky, so that's the Dovetailer. I just type it. The thing is too long, and I'm too lazy to change it, so I'm on Blue Sky. I am on Discord, but only for close friends. So if you want to try to be friends with me, cool. If you don't, we'll see. And I do have a website. It's also the Dovetailer. So there's a website, then there's Substack, but just find me on Blue Sky. I'm very noisy. I'm currently neck deep in trying to finish my FF14 novellas before I die. I am only on Heaven's Ward. It takes me 1 year to write an expansion. So you can just imagine that I will be a senior citizen by the time I reach Dawntrail. So you
Well,
will
Pam, look on the bright side. It's 2 years for them to release an expansion. So if there's only 1 year for you to write an expansion, you will catch up eventually.
I know. I'm speed, but I'm also very slow by my standards. So, that said, I do talk about game design. So, you're going to get the full package of Pam if you join me on Blue Sky, because I will talk game design and then I will flood you with my fanfic. So, if you are in that Venn diagram of I like FF14 and I like TTRPGs, I am the solution to all of your problems, basically. And I'm also very loud these days about trying to make Global South creators visible again, because we all took a hit when Twitter died. Uh, well, it's basically dead in my eyes. So I'm trying to make sure to make those creators more visible. I'm no longer in the Philippines, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm a Southeast Asian woman. So that's generally where I am these days.
Twitter may not be dead, but it's certainly dead to me.
Exactly.
All right, and then I'm Liana McKenzie. You can find me at Valor Liana on Blue Sky now. I am holding my Twitter account specifically to retweet as part of my duties as host of Asians Rep, and also with my own Valorous Games stuff. You can also find our website, valorousgames.com, where I make a game, and then on Blue Sky I'll pretty much talk about that or feed food and or cat pics. But yes, thank you so much for joining us. I hope this was enlightening. I hope this will help you determine in your own design and also in the design of others what you do and do not want to put out into the world. But that has been our episode on how Gacha makes games worse. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.